Alrighty, now that we're back from break, we begin on section 6 of our lecture on electrophysiology. We just left off talking about net depolarization that occurs in the heart. And we established that the atria and the ventricles have different paths of depolarization. The ventricles have a slightly more acute angle when they depolarize, and the atria less so. So when we're looking at an EKG for this lecture's purposes, we're going to take what's called the net depolarization between the two. And the net is just that. It's the average of these two depolarization pathways, which will take this conduction pathway right here. So, using Einthoven's triangle that we talked about earlier and that y'all established when y'all hooked each other up to EKGs at the beginning of the class, we'll focus on lead 2. Now, if we isolate lead 2 right here, and we bring it down here, we'll notice that the positive lead takes this angle downward towards here. We'll call it a 4 or 5 o'clock angle on lead 2. Now, we'll move our net depolarization pathway right here, down here next to lead 2. And you'll notice they line up pretty well as almost parallel to one another. This is also the reason lead 2 is the preferred lead when viewing cardiac conduction in an EKG, whether 4 lead, 3 lead. So when you have a parallel conduction pathway, this will actually yield the largest possible positive deflection on an EKG, which our net depolarization with lead 2 will yield. Because depolarization being positive leads like positive activity, we'll give it a thumbs up, big thumbs up when it's parallel. Now, the conduction doesn't take place in a perfect straight line. It'd be too easy if it did. Instead, it takes various pathways as it reaches its way from the SA to the AV to the bundle to the Purkinje fibers, etc., and completes a PQRST. In that pathway, there will be some diagonal movement. And diagonal movement is, it's still moving towards our positive lead, but not in a perfectly parallel fashion. It'll take something along these lines, maybe something like this. But when that occurs, you still get a positive deflection, just not one as perfect as parallel. So it'll be kind of a medium positive deflection. And going even further with that, there are some conduction paths that move perpendicular to our view lead. When I say perpendicular, I don't mean kind of, I mean at a perfect 90-degree angle. When that occurs, you will either get no deflection whatsoever, or a biphasic deflection. And a biphasic deflection is the same height upward as downward for a net of 0. Now, oftentimes, conduction will actually go against our positive lead, going towards our negative lead. And if we apply what we know with positive deflections, what do you think a reverse parallel would look like?
Negative.
It would be negative. Would it be medium, big? Big negative deflection, correct. Continuing with a reverse diagonal conduction pathway. We think it's going to be positive, negative, negative, large, medium. Anybody? That's enough chatter out of you.
Medium.
Medium. That's correct. Now, again, all of this is deviating from our isoelectric line. If you had a patient in asystole, would it look any different than if you hooked an EKG up to a table? It wouldn't, and that's the establishment of our isoelectric line. So that'll kind of conclude section 6 at this point. Does anyone have any questions? What you got?
So does it talk about anything about circulation, or is this only dealing with electrical conduction?
Well, at the beginning of the lecture, we talked about an EKG being a vector measurement that measures force and the direction of that force. This is going to detect conduction. However, in the conduction, you can see contractile patterns that correlate to what you're doing with an EKG. If that makes sense.
How do you determine what your baseline is?
The baseline we also call the isoelectric line. So if a patient is in asystole with zero activity whatsoever, you're going to have the flat line. That'll be our isoelectric. Once a conduction is picked up in an EKG, that is where we'll have deviations that are both positive and negative. And